Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kep, co-founder and editor-in-chief of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. Welcome to our webinar today, which is about managing headcount more effectively to meet talent needs and financial goals. Now, today we'll be talking about managing headcount more effectively to meet talent needs and financial goals. Workforce planning in many organizations is uncoordinated, with decentralized data and teams failing to coordinate. The consequences can be serious. Delayed decision-making, overspending, missed revenue targets. What's needed is a strategic imperative to build a more cohesive and collaborative system, which can underpin fiscal health and boost organizational growth. Leaders from companies who pursued cutting-edge methods will tell how they've integrated their fragmented data sources to provide an accurate and actionable view. They'll discuss both sides of the headcount management story, HR and finance, and share how to effectively collaborate with each other to align strategic decisions with company goals and manage the company's largest expense, which is headcount. Today's webinar is presented with support from TeamOhana. You can look out for a written account of the conversation on our website at fromday1.co. Now, with all that said, let's meet today's speakers. Moderating the discussion will be Emily McCrary-Ruiz-Esparza, a From Day One contributing editor and freelance journalist who covers the future of work, HR, recruiting, and women's experiences in the workplace. Her work has appeared at the Washington Post, Fast Company, Quartz, and the BBC, among others. So thank you all for being here today. Let's get started. Emily, please take it away.
Thank you, Steve. Happy to be here, and welcome to all three of our panelists. Before I start asking you all questions, I'd like to begin with some introductions. So I'd like for each of our panelists to introduce themselves and what they do at their companies. So we'll start with Nick at Gravie. Tell us what you do at your company and also in your role, how you work with the HR department.
All right, so I'm Nick Price. I work at Gravie. We're a health benefits company, and I am the vice president of finance here. So we collaborate quite a bit with HR on all our headcount forecasts. We obviously collaborate with all the different leaders and everything. But HR is our primary partner in terms of, when are we hiring? What types of roles are we hiring and how much we're hiring for? And that process and collaboration informs, the largest part of our operating expenses for our company. So it's a pretty important collaboration between our two departments.
Thanks, Nick. Happy to have you. Anne at 23andMe, tell us what you do at the company and how you work with the finance arm of 23andMe.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Anne Comolli. I work for 23andMe. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition and DEI. I work across all functions of our very complex business on strategic workforce planning and recruiting. My partnership with finance, with people like Nick, is a really cohesive collaborative effort that looks to manage what is our largest expenditure and making sure that we're being strategic about when and what we're hiring.
Great, thanks, Anne. And last but not least, Tushar at TeamOhana. Steve gave us an introduction to your company, but tell us a little bit more about how it came to be, what led you to create this platform.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone. My name is Tushar. I'm the founder of TeamOhana. I think what good opportunities come from adversity. So this is right in the middle of pandemic. I've been in leadership roles for the last decade, and I build the go-to-market teams at fast-growing startups. This was one more opportunity where we had just closed a big round of funding, and this was pre-COVID. The mandate was, Tushar, go spend all the money, hire all the people you need. Great. I built a team of 25 people, then came COVID. The same board said, Tushar, you're spending way a lot of money. You need to reduce headcount right now. Headcount is we're going to burn a lot of capital. COVID didn't turn out to be the headwind. It actually turned out to be a tailwind for software. So in another 3 months, I was told to go rebuild and hire everybody else by the same very smart venture capitalists and also my CEO. So while I was doing all of this, I was sitting down with the finance team, with the talent team, and just living in spreadsheets. And at the end of it, I thought, if I'm having this problem hiring 25 people, how is Nick doing it with 600 people? How is Anne doing it with 800 people? And that was the idea, that the time is now to actually build a platform that can help companies plan and manage their headcount, both from a cost perspective and a people perspective. Because at the end of the day, you have to build good teams. It's not just about dollars and cents. It's important, but on the other hand, the good companies build brilliant teams that take them forward. So that's how we came to be.
Yeah, definitely saw an opportunity to solve a really important problem. So let's talk about that. And I'd like to start with you. What was the problem or the group of problems that spurred you to look for a new way of managing headcount at 23andMe?
Yeah, a couple of things. So similar to what Tushar mentioned, when as companies were hit with headwinds, being able to access information very quickly to make decisions was a real roadblock for us. We couldn't do that because we were working across multiple spreadsheets and multiple systems that weren't speaking to each other. And so our manual process would take our recruiters about an hour each week to go in and enter in information. And within minutes, and those recruiters or talent acquisition professionals on the call will know, the moment you put that in, the data's stale a minute later. Recruiting moves very quickly, and the business continues to evolve. Also, our pace of recruiting does. So the moment those things would be entered, the data's stale. And as we would go into forecast and pull multiple spreadsheets and multiple systems into one, I never really had confidence, nor did my finance partner, that it was 100% accurate. And so there was always this, yeah, this seems right, or this is probably the right direction, but there is going to be this room for error. And when you're making decisions around people and dollars, especially when you need to be very thoughtful about where you spend money, it's not a great place to operate. The other thing that happened is, as we were in decisions about where we needed to make changes in terms of headcount, whether we needed to add headcount or scale back, the data wasn't available in those meetings. And so oftentimes we'd have these hypothetical conversations about, okay, we could do this, we could do that, but we couldn't explain how much that would result in savings. We'd have to go back, pull that information, and do some analyzing to then come back with, okay, this is what this could be. And so from an efficiency perspective, you're having 3 meetings to make a decision that could be handled with the information at your fingertips.
So you mentioned that the moment you put something into your headcount management, sometimes it's a spreadsheet for many people, whatever old method you were using, that it's outdated as soon as you put it in. What's changing constantly about a business that is making that information old immediately? What's going on in the background that some people may not see?
Yeah. So sometimes projects might get pushed out or pushed forward. And so the target date that you need to hire someone is, could be sooner than you had anticipated in your plan, or it could be later. And what does that mean from a budget standpoint and how you're slotting people into gating open roles? The other things that can happen is there might be external factors in the market where you estimate that it could take you a certain period of time to find talent, and you go out and you do some analysis and realize that there's actually a talent shortage in that group, and it's going to take you 90 days versus the 45 that you thought it would. So there's also too candidates in driving our timeline sometimes as well. And we're working with humans that are making really personal decisions, whether or not to join a job or not. And some of those things, no matter how hard we work or how hard we help present what work at 23andMe will look like, it doesn't always align. And so those can change in terms of timing.
Yeah, the problems of talent shortages are an issue for a lot of employers right now, especially those that have some highly specialized roles, like I'm sure you guys do at 23andMe. Nick, from a financial planning and analysis point of view, why is it so important to get workforce planning right the first time? And what are the things that tend to get in the way of that?
Yeah, great question, Emily. Thank you. So I think like budgeting and forecasting is the obvious answer that you'll probably hear from a lot of people. When I reflect on, us here at Gravie, I've been at different companies and I think the answer might be a little bit different, but when you're a small but fast growing company, cash flow forecasting is so important too. And given that like the headcount and people are, our number one cost, getting that correct and knowing not only like how many you're going to hire and what departments you're going to hire them, but also when you're going to hire them, because that timing is such a crucial factor as well. It's just so important to get that that correct up front, but the other thing is like the leaders of the company also need to know what resources they're going to have available to them and when, so they can make decisions, and they can also set expectations with their leaders and management on, what things they're going to be able to deliver given those resources that they have. So it's so important to understand, how many, but also the when that's going to happen, so that they can make informed decisions on when they're going to be able to deliver different outcomes that they promise to different people. And then I think thirdly, a little bit, I mean, you're dealing with people here. So overhiring is not a great position to be in either, because, you're impacting somebody's life if you have to reduce your hiring, especially when you're a company that's kind of new and scrappy and starting up. Like if you're overspent, you got to find ways to reduce that. And unfortunately, sometimes that's laying off people. So overhiring is just as bad as being on the other side of it and underhiring.
Gosh, I know so many employers found themselves there on the overhiring side of things within the last year and having to cut really large numbers of their workforces.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like we're lucky that we're growing so fast that you can kind of outpace that in a way that you don't have to cut back, and maybe you're a little ahead of the curve. But I've been at other organizations where that's absolutely something you have to look at, and it's not a fun position to be in from a leader standpoint or a finance professional standpoint. And then I think you asked what tends to get in the way of effective headcount management. Well, Anne mentioned it, Tushar mentioned a little bit in his opening as well, but like trying to manage through spreadsheets and hallway conversations and different data sources that all are updated at different times. Anne said the word stale. Yeah, the information becomes stale almost immediately as you're pulling it into that, into that spreadsheet. And, historically last year when we were managing headcount, we'd, update actuals, and then we'd go work with all the leaders and make sure we had the right information and work with HR to make sure our information was in sync with theirs. And, that process took multiple meetings and multiple hours. And by the time you got to the end of the process, you weren't actually sure if you had all the information that you needed, because you might have missed things, in the middle of it. And so, working with TeamOhana has been huge for us, because that all becomes, seamless and instantaneous. So right now I can pull, the information out of TeamOhana kind of like at the snap of my fingers. And I know it's right because HR and finance and the leaders all are in there all the time. And, we approve positions, as they come through. So I know, and I have tons of confidence that as I pull that information, it's accurate at the time in which I pull it. So that information is not stale. It's accurate instantaneously. So that's helped us immensely this year.
Tushar, you're going to have a higher level view of headcount management and how it's done across many different businesses. Anne and Nick mentioned problems of timing, communication, things changing, and different data sources, that kind of thing. What are some of the most common problems with headcount management that you're seeing in the market today? Are those the most common, or are there more that you're seeing across businesses?
I think that the essence is exactly, because both Anne and Nick are practitioners of this art. So they are telling us about the more practical real-time problems and pain points that they face. But if I take a 30,000 foot view, I think it goes back to how traditional enterprise software has been sold. If I'm selling into finance, I'm picking up the phone and just talking to Nick about, hey, let me sell you a finance platform that only you will use and you'll be the happiest person on the planet. Then if I am talking to Anne, I'm not talking about anything else, but I'm just talking about, hey, let's sell you the best HR system out there, best ATS out there, right? And fundamentally, the business does not operate that way. The business of people does not operate that way. So I think the biggest challenge and the opportunity for TeamOhana was to break these data silos. And we can't do it for every, we're not doing it for sales or marketing. We have chosen to embed ourselves and serve the finance and HR organizations, which we know are basically, one is a steward of capital and the other is a steward of people. If you don't have enough capital, you cannot hire enough people. And if you don't have enough people, you're not going to grow revenue. So it's all so tied. And it comes down to two fundamental things. If you break these data silos, it is a capital allocation problem, as Nick was saying, right? If I know hiring is running slow and I have a leading indicator on that and not backward-looking data from last quarter, but I'm seeing in real time, I can tell the sales team that, hey, you said you were going to hire 30 people, but you've not been able to do that. I'm going to take this money and give it to the product team because they are moving at a much faster clip. Companies need to do this on a more efficient basis, and it's a capital allocation problem. On the other hand, it is all about, if Anne clearly sees that from a talent pipeline perspective, there are certain delays that are going to happen in hiring, she can say that to the business leaders and say, we have to adjust our plans or the outcomes that we are looking for, the new products we have to build, the new product we have to sell, because we're not going to be able to find the talent that we need. But all of these decisions before TeamOhana were running in a different silos. Someone was walking into Nick's office and say, can you give me the right budget? Someone was going into Anne's office separately and say, Anne, if I have all the budget and the blessing of the CEO, can you hire me 30 people? And both answers can be, yes, sure, maybe let me go try. But when you start going in that one direction, you're just going to find that we are at odds with each other because one system does not talk to the other. So fundamentally, this is a data silo problem. And then once you break the data silos, you can build workflows that enable each of these department owners from a finance perspective, BU perspective, and talent perspective to do their work in a more business process automation kind of a way instead of doing it in a spreadsheet. Because spreadsheet is the best tool out there, but it is for individual use cases. If you put 5 people in a spreadsheet, then it becomes a hodgepodge of information that nobody knows how to track.
Nick, I saw you nodding your head while Tushar was talking about a request coming in through finance versus coming in through HR. What was on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, we operate so much in hallway conversations sometimes around here. And so, you'll hear, hey, this person approved this job, or we're thinking about this, or we're, this might be on the horizon in 2 months or whatever it is. And it's like, it's hallway conversations, and it's really hard to take that information that you're kind of hearing in drips and drabs and marry it up with what's actually in the budget and the forecast, and and who approved, and is that a legitimate hallway conversation, or is that just somebody thinking out loud? And we've been able to kind of streamline that with it goes in through TeamOhana, multiple people have to approve it. We all know whether it's like an official job or if it's just somebody's, random 5-minute thought. And it's just helped a lot to be able to have that more seamless process versus a bunch of different hallway conversations that don't necessarily marry up with reality sometimes. So that's why I was nodding.
Tushar, doing research and staying on top of the way things are going in the market, maybe improving the product as well. Do you ever get a sense of how much time and money that old way is costing an employer, and how something like TeamOhana, or even just a new way in general, rethinking it, communication, can change the books? Yeah, so
we run this analysis with the companies. Let's say if you're a 500 person or a person company or 1,000 person company, you at least have 2 full-time headcount, just managing 2 full-time employees managing headcount. And this is just their dedicated work. And then you've got the talent team, the HR team, the business leaders doing all the manual asking each other questions. So at the end of the day, there is like the anecdotal evidence is that if everyone is working off one source of truth, this business decision making just flows naturally and people are not waiting on each other for answers. I think that's the number one thing we solve for all the key stakeholders in the company, that depending on who you are in the company and what accesses or permissions you have, you can go into TeamOhana and you'll know out of the box, what is my approved headcount? What is my current headcount? How is hiring progressing? Am I in budget or am I over budget? And then basically there are workflows to help you go remedy this, because it's not just an analytics platform that collects data and gives you reports, but it allows you to remedy and take action to rectify something if it is going in the wrong direction, right? So the number one ROI is basically, as you scale as a company, are you linearly increasing the amount of people that you need to manage headcount? Or can TeamOhana bring that productivity gain where instead of one person managing one headcount managing 500 employees, can we double it to 1,000? Can we double it to 50, triple it to 1,500 employees? And I think that's the goal that we are going after.
So the idea of having to manage headcount or even over hiring or being over budget, losing a lot of employees, having to rehire, that's not a new idea. Of course, businesses have always had to do this. But what are you finding that's changing in the talent market right now that's driving customers to a platform like yours?
Yeah, I think it's, if you look at the last 12 months and, you might have written about efficient growth, growing responsibly. I always ask people, give me the next 10 words. How would you do it? You've been doing something for the last 20, 25 years. I'm just giving an example of a short span of time, right? How would you go and suddenly become efficient? These are the same people working in the same jobs. What has changed, right? So I think this is the fundamental question, and that has multiple layers where VC funding has slowed down. Interest rates are no longer at zero. So basically now this conversation is front and center. And whenever this conversation happens front and center, the CFO is empowered to make the big decision because they are the stewards of capital, and go tell everyone in the organization that budget adherence is a no-miss KPI, right? Nick will tell you 2 years back, Nick was still sounding the alarm, but maybe people were like, don't worry, we're going to raise the next round of funding. We are the fastest growing startup on planet, right? And now it's, no, let's visibility, control, budget adherence. There is still enough money to be spent, but here is what we need. So that is the fundamental switch that has happened in people's mind. The market is telling you to be efficient. And when you sit down and you ask yourself, why the hell am I inefficient and what can I do better? Headcount variance and headcount budget looks at you at this in a glaring way and say, hey, fix me, right? It's right there. So if you buy, think about this, if you buy 10 pieces of software, the amount of time I'm going to put finance again on you have heard of procurement functions at companies. Let's say you have to buy $50,000 worth of software. You'll go through negotiation, you'll fill up a form, then you'll go through security review, legal review, budget review, and then eventually, the procurement person will come and say, hey, vendor, you have to cut down your prices and then we'll buy you. Great. We go through this whole shebang. On the headcount side, there is no rigor. If the CEO is in a good mood, you walk into his or her office and say, hey, I think we need to hire this best AI engineer for $300,000. And yes, let's go, let's do it. And Nick would know after 2 months when the person is actually joining. All your savings are gone. And that's how you result in overspending.
I'd like to hear from our other panelists as well. And from your perspective, why a platform like this now? Why the need to manage headcount in a different way in this moment?
So I was shaking my head at what Tushar was saying, because and Nick, the hallway conversations, and when you're growing and we need the people in order to hit the product goals. For us, it was creating that process and efficiency and a model that we could be very agile and flexible. So if we needed, I talked about this at the beginning, but we have a product roadmap. If that somehow was adjusted, taking a look at that in terms of headcount and looking at full across the entire enterprise, what does that mean from product and that's going to trickle down into engineering. And one centralized, transparent system allows leaders to understand what's coming through the pipeline, how that might affect their teams, and we can collectively have conversations as a whole. So, product isn't hiring a one-off person, that engineering or marketing has no idea that that's coming down the pipeline, and that work is coming faster than we think. So I think it's more than just headcount. It forces us to also have really transparent conversations about the resources that we need to achieve our business results. And no one wants to be, I think Nick and I are always put in that situations as being kind of like gatekeepers and police officers of headcount. And that's not what we want to do. Like, we want this business to grow as much as we want to hit our target. We're in this just as much as we are. So this allows us to have much more collaborative conversations with data to say, here's what it looks like. Here's our recommendation. What do you think? How does this fit in terms of what you need to achieve your functions results?
Nick, from your perspective, what's different now than say 5 years ago that makes this a good thing?
It's almost like Anne and I have worked together for 5 years and we don't work together, but like all the things she's saying are like exactly what I'm thinking. And the gatekeeper was just like, oh my gosh, it's exactly what happens, right? And I could spend 5 minutes and say the same things that Tushar and Anne said, but I'll go maybe in a little bit different direction. Like one of the other things that's happening, and it's maybe unique to this role at this company, for me, is that we also have a lot of movement within departments and in positions. And one of the things that's been really helpful for us is like, we can also think in boxes and not necessarily people's names. Because one of the things that was hard managing in spreadsheets is like, all right, so John Smith is in X role and he moves to Y role. Well, it's hard because you're thinking of John Smith as a person, and that role movement doesn't necessarily happen, easily in a spreadsheet where TeamOhana helps you think in boxes a little bit more. So how many boxes or, within this org, and then if John Smith moves to another org, it seamlessly creates a box. And so it's that movement of people. And when you're growing, there's a ton of movement of people. It's really allowed us to manage that a little bit more seamlessly than we were able to on a spreadsheet, because it's just harder to make those movements and keep the history of when they lived in this department and now when they live in that department. And that's one of the things. And I don't know if that's a huge change to how talent and managing talent over the last 5 years has changed, but it's certainly something unique to the situation I'm in now that I haven't seen as much of in other roles.
I think internal mobility, while that's always gone on, of course, there is a renewed interest in it for retention purposes. People are interested in the career lattice rather than the career ladder in ways they weren't before. So being able to move someone throughout an organization more fluidly, I think is a little bit different in the last 5 years. There's more of that going on for sure. And when you were looking for a workforce planning tool, can you tell us what your vetting process was like? What kind of questions were you asked? What were you asking? What criteria were you working with? You were probably representing your own interests as well as interests of others in the business. So how did that go?
Yeah, so there were a number of things that were really important. I think the biggest thing is we run a small and scrappy team. So something that was easy to implement was really important, because I don't have a tremendous amount of bandwidth to sit and do huge implementation timelines that take most of my week, and let alone bringing in maybe an expensive external IT resource. So kind of that turnkey approach was very, very imperative for us. Also, something that could integrate our existing systems, so our applicant tracking system, our HRIS system, and then our finance system was great, because that would keep those tools in place and we wouldn't have to reinvent the use of those tools. Also customizable, something that wasn't as stuffy. Like if we had we have some very, very specific work processes that we use, and it varies across the business, where we could make some customizations on our own that we didn't need to call in some, an engineer to code or do it that way. It was something that we can make those changes on our own. And then I would say the last thing is something where we could pull real-time data, like in the meeting. Like somebody asks a question, and while we're having the meeting, I can say, okay, our backfill rate is 72%. And oh, you want to see what the spend is for October? Okay, it's this. If we moved these jobs to this month, that would save us X. So like I said at the beginning, like something where we could have that instantly, not having to go back and do some sort of, an analytical exercise. We just have it live and there.
Out of curiosity, how long would that normally have taken you?
So I was thinking about this last night as I was preparing for today. I think it would have taken probably like a half a day between finance and myself to, pull together. That would have been through 2 systems, and then aggregating all of that into one spreadsheet and pulling in our manual process. I think and of course, then you'd have to drop everything that you were currently working on that, to make this a priority. So it's kind of twofold. It takes the time, but then you're reprioritizing some business imperatives.
Nick, how has something like this platform, how has it changed your communication with HR? Obviously, it's made it more quick. I would imagine you might be getting along better.
No, that's fair. I mean, we've always had a really good relationship with HR. I think that's just kind of, a natural place to be in, even when we were working off spreadsheets. I do think, like you mentioned speed, and I do think, the speed has allowed us to spend less time communicating about reconciliations of what's on the spreadsheet and much more time being strategic and talking about like things like Tushar mentioned at the beginning in terms of, how long is it going to take for us to hire this person? When can we expect the benefits of bringing that person in? Is there anything out in the market that we're seeing that would slow down these type of hires? So we need to be more proactive. So like much more proactive conversations and collaboration versus, before it was a little bit reactive, and it was a little bit, how do we reconcile this? I mean, where did this role come from? I don't think we've ever heard about this one. It's not in the budget. Oh, this email from a long time ago. It's just allowed us to be a lot more, it's allowed us to spend a lot more time on the things that actually matter, and less time on the things that honestly aren't all that important, which is reconciling and tying spreadsheets together and things like that. And then the only other thing I'll say on that is, going back to this gatekeeper mindset, I think that it is so I'll answer this in terms of how it's allowed us to communicate with other departments. It feels a lot less gatekeeper-ish when they're putting stuff into Ohana and we're more approving it, and we've had conversations before they're going in and they know it's the one source of truth. So it feels like a lot less like we're gatekeepers and the know people than we historically have been thought of. And selfishly, I enjoy that a lot more. So
Nick mentioned reactivity and that being an old way of doing things. My understanding of reporting on the HR field is that because HR is playing a far more influential role in business, that reactivity is not an option anymore, that you're called on to be more proactive. And in your experience, is that a reflection of the way the HR profession is changing? Or yes, tell me more.
Yeah, I think, historically, human resources would be, an administrator, and it's work to become a greater seat at the table as that strategic partner. You can't get there if you're doing reactive work or, not staying 10 steps ahead. And I think that's where, this relates into my partnership with finance, is without, Nick said, this reconciliation piece, we can actually be true thought partners to the business and do actual workforce planning, which essentially is looking at, okay, what are the skills that you need to accomplish this? What sort of jobs line up to those skills, and mapping out an org chart and figuring out what the cost is of that. Less about, okay, we're spending all these hours reconciling and figuring it out. We can come with, okay, and understanding everything we know about the business. Here's an idea. Here's an approach that might work. So that has been just a breath of fresh air, and exercising the parts of human resources that like I signed up for when I went into this as a career, and the things that I wanted to be. I, studied business, and I wanted to be able to use and exercise that skill set and mindset, and not just be an executor or reacting or putting out fires. So anywhere you can create efficiency allows people like myself to spend more time in that sandbox.
I want to remind our audience that in about 10 minutes or so, we'll take some audience questions. So if you have questions for any of our panelists, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll get to as many of those as we have time for. And we already have some really good ones coming in. I've been perusing. So there are some that we'll definitely address as soon as we can. Tushar, I want to come back to you. Can you tell us some of the most significant individual points of friction that you focus on when creating and then continuing to improve the platform?
When you mean individual, are you talking about the business leader, the finance person, the HR person, the talent person?
You could answer it that way, or specific decisions that have to be made. Maybe that becomes a point of friction, but this is your world.
Yeah.
What do you think is maybe most important?
So I think two additional points before I answer that is that first, the way I think about the role of finance and HR, or the G&A function changing, is that instead of throwing bodies at the problem and becoming caregivers, they have to become a center of excellence. People are coming to them for advice, for approvals, but they are not sitting and doing the grunt work, because it's not going to scale. It is very hard to go find financial analysts and even very good talent ops people, right? So that is just continuously, the talent pool is constrained. So people can't just go and throw money at it and say, let's go to hire 10 new people. It's not gonna happen. Another thing from a financial perspective is that any money you spend on G&A is a drag on your revenue. So companies, as they scale, cannot keep spending more on G&A. It's not just HR or talent, it's basically the entire G&A function. So those are some of the things that result in this natural friction that you're talking about, is that, okay, how many people are we hiring? Who are we hiring? How much should we pay them? How are we paying them compared to everybody else in the company? When we have to backfill a role, are we backfilling them at a 20% higher clip, or how are we going to pay them? Should we move this role to nearshore, offshore? These are all the decisions that actually should be made, and the answers will come if there is enough time for the leaders to sit in a room and talk about these decisions, instead of talking about, you said you were going to hire this, but now you're under the budget, over the budget. Nobody trusts each other's data, and they're finger pointing. I mean, I've seen this in the early days of building the product. I spent 6 months talking to CFOs, and some of those kind ones invited me to their headcount meeting, which happens usually on a Friday or a Monday. And it is very stressful. Too many people in a spreadsheet. Who made this change? This formula is wrong, right? And finance is always irritated on one hand, no offense to HR, but HR is not known to be very good at spreadsheets. But finance is excellent at spreadsheet. So if you build a masterful spreadsheet with all these formulas that got changed because of a wrong copy paste, Nick is, however nice a human being he is, he's going to be frustrated, right? So I think these are the things that allow you to now, at the essence of it, I'll be very honest. What we have done is drawn swim lanes for people to come and take certain actions. We've made it easy. It is as easy as doing a LinkedIn post to request headcount, right? So people feel empowered to go into the platform, make these decisions, because they know there is the finance team, the HR team is going to give them feedback. They're not going to let this pass. And finance team has this confidence that, hey, If not in TeamOhana, it does not exist. So all workflows lead from TeamOhana, right? And then the final piece of all of this is good organizational growth. People in a spreadsheet, you forget, hey, I'm the head of engineering, I'm going to bring in 20 people. Great. We will quickly start asking the questions around what is the compensation, what should be their title, level, which location we should be hiring. That's great. But when you look at it in an org chart, the next question that now Anne can ask is that, okay, great. Who are these people going to report into? Think about spans and layers, right? Think about, and as you grow as a company, we can run analytics and say, gender distribution of teams, ethnicity distribution, because Anne is also the leader of the DEI at 23andMe, right? So now she has time to look at it from an organizational perspective and not just a headcount plan perspective, right? So I think that those are the decisions that now can be made better, because there is a way to get there.
We've talked, of course, a lot about how it's going to make the job of the finance department and HR department easier, more fluid. How does this show up for a worker in an organization? Where does the workforce feel the benefit of good headcount management? Tushar, where does that feeling happen?
So, so if you're asking the question, is the worker, the employee, logging into TeamOhana right now? No, they are not. It starts at the hiring manager level, right? But if you think about, I heard this a few years back from a very smart person, and it remains with me, is that good people strategy is very good company strategy. If you look at, it's all about building cohesive, collaborative teams. So how you are spending the money, how you are hiring the people, how you are making sure that you're not running out of money, that you have to do layoffs. How are you investing in the right projects that lead to more revenue so that the company prospers? And if the company prospers, the workforce is prospering. So this is not like a performance management system where you will go and put in your one-on-one or write your annual review. There are better tools to do that. We are not in that business. But the downstream effects of good strategic planning is basically good company strategy. And that good company strategy results in more revenue, it results in happier customers, bonuses, no layoffs, expansion. And that's, as a startup founder, that's what I dream of, right? I'm not saying that I want 10,000 people in my company, but I'm like, can we get to 10,000 very happy, collaborative individuals who are finding their worth and working together with us and helping take the organization forward, right? But it's very hard to do. And it's not possible to do with the current tool set.
Well, let's take some audience questions, which some of them are really good, very, very astute observations. We'll start with this one from Rhonda, who writes, how will this platform help me convince corporate finance that you cannot have a static headcount for the fiscal year when supply and demand in manufacturing calls for peaks and valleys? Nick, I see you nodding. What kind of argument would you need to hear?
Well, what's interesting is my last role was in a manufacturing company, so I get exactly what Rhonda's asking. And yeah, but we actually have the same thing here, where you have a peak season in January, and then you kind of, you have the season where you're a little, not everybody, but certain people are less busy because you're not onboarding as many new clients. And, you can just plan so much further out. And some of us, one of the ways that we handle it, and TeamOhana has helped with this a little bit, is we have different roles that have different peaks throughout the year. So like, the team that does implementation is really peak in January, and then the team that does account management starts to peak a little bit after that. And then the sales team peaks a little bit after that. And one of the ways that we've done it, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is people move roles quite a bit. And so as we get, we ramp up for peak, and then those people might move to a different area that has a different peak. Maybe not the people that just moved over, but some people that have had more time in their role. And so like I said, the boxes are easier to move than the people on a spreadsheet sometimes. And so that's one of the ways that we've managed through it.
Thanks, Nick. And thanks, Rhonda, for that question. We have one from an attendee who writes anonymously, and they ask, how often do you provide open and filled summaries to business leaders? With data being available every minute, what is a recommended cadence of sharing the data? Anne or Tushar, would either one of you like to take this one?
Yeah,
Anne should take that.
I think they can log in and look every day. Like that's the reality is like I'm a big dashboard person. And so I love when like a leader says, well, what's the status of this? And I can say, well, just log in and you'll be able to see what things look like. Now, in the absence of a platform, it may be like there's a weekly report that we run just to kind of, as we look at our team meetings, a snapshot as recruiters when we come together. But the beauty of having a platform is a leader could look real time and then know, okay, this is when this is when this is not. There's also an opportunity to put in priority levels and report on that. So what's a higher priority versus not a less of a priority. So I think that's the reality is not only do we have access instantly, but that like a leader could log in and see what status was.
I'm going to throw this one to you as well, Anne. This attendee asks, how can organizations ensure their future workforce planning strategies are inclusive of diverse talent pools? Tushar got us started on this. What's your perspective from being inside an organization, being a head of talent acquisition?
I think that's where it comes into, we do a lot of work at building our pipelines, our candidate pipelines with diverse talent before we enter into like an interview process. So that's twofold. It can be, active recruit where we're working on building candidates into the pipeline that are we have a diverse slate. It also could be working with organizations externally to bring in passive candidates that whether it's not now, it's future opportunities. The power of networking and making sure that you have a pipeline of creating inclusivity. Read the second part of the question. I want to make sure I answered that.
This person writes, it was anonymously submitted. How can organizations ensure that their future workforce planning strategies are inclusive of diverse talent pools?
Okay. Yeah, so I think that would answer it. It's a plan also that I'll add to what I just said is a plan allows you to know what you're going to need in that year. And so you can start to look at, okay, for women engineers, let's get going with them because we know that we're, in Q4 going to need 17 people. Let's start nurturing those relationships now. So when you have a plan, it's easier to start that proactive networking ahead of time.
Okay. All right, let's take this one next. Someone in our audience asks, is it part of headcount planning to make the case that some increased headcount can help grow revenue rather than just being a cost? That's a long one. I'll read it again. Is it part of headcount planning to make the case that some increased headcount can help grow revenue rather than just being a cost? Anne and Nick, if you could both take a stab at this one, I'd like to hear from you both.
All right. So yes, absolutely. I mean, for us, our headcount planning is all about that. Like we don't necessarily bring people in just to sit around and do nothing. We're very strategic about why we're hiring somebody and what their intended role in the company is. And some of that's, hey, we need salespeople to help us grow revenue, or we need account managers to help, retain the groups that we already have, and some of it's not about revenue. Some of it's about cost savings. We think somebody's going to go help us do something different or tell us about TeamOhana so that we don't have to hire 3 finance people and 4 HR people to do all the workforce planning. So we're very strategic about the people we hire, and I'm assuming, everybody's company is to some extent, but we definitely bring people in with the intent that they're going to drive efficiencies or drive revenue or drive some benefit to the company, because ultimately that's the goal of what we do.
Thanks, Nick. And
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on that, sometimes that happens after the plan's already been created at the, for the fiscal year, and it's Q2, and it's like, well, wait a second, if we brought this outsourced thing in-house, we'd save X. Or if we hired another business development person, they would bring in this amount of revenue. So there's always, I think that's where the agility comes into, is we have to be able to look at our workforce differently. And sometimes you have to hire people to drive revenue. Like I can think of a procurement example where, we were spending a lot of money, and for the amount that it would cost to bring in a procurement person, we knew that that would save X number so that it would pay for the job itself. So like going through those lenses and having that dialogue, and being able to have a process around that makes it easier to have those discussions, rather than someone saying in the hallway, oh, I need to do this because it'll do this. Like we can have really solid business justifications to make sure that we've looked at every component and that, yes, this will give us the ROI that it's intended to do.
mhm.
Emily, just quickly to add there, like the one way to think about this is that TeamOhana allows you to record your business decisions. I'm not saying that this decision is right or wrong, but because it allows you to record this decision, that you made a scenario which says, in this scenario, if I hire 10 new people, I'm going to look at a revenue increase of X. That's great. You approve that scenario, and that scenario continues to live in the system. And you can come back and finance can ask this question: what were the decisions that we made and how are we tracking towards it? Even in the process, I think what gets missed sometimes is that, yes, there is a key initiative that is being created in a business, and now we have to hire against that initiative, but it's very easy. It's not easy. So it's very hard to go track it. TeamOhana has an out-of-the-box report, which will literally tell you all the initiatives that you're tracking, and are you tracking towards plan, or you're not tracking towards, at least on a headcount perspective, which directly is tied to, well, we wanted to hire 10 people, we could not, so that's why we did not hit the revenue goal, right? So it's recording the business decisions that makes the difference.
On this call, we have the great benefit of having representatives from departments that work together but are not in the same function, with Ann and Nick both being here. So in the few minutes before we close out, I'm hoping both of you could tell us, what advice do you have for the opposite function about how to best work with you? So Ann, let's start with you. How can finance be a better partner to the HR team? For instance, what do you find that you need that's often hard to get?
I think it's somebody that has a really keen understanding of what's happening in the business, as I would expect that out of myself, because then the conversations we can have are much more strategic, and as we influence the business, so less about being a finance executor or keeping track of things, and more about truly being, as an HR business partner, but a finance business partner. And I have the fortune of having that currently, and it makes it much easier as we have conversations, because we tend to be on the same page in our understanding of what business priorities are, what levers we can pull. So I would say that, that keen understanding of how our business works and how businesses work in general.
Nick, you have a lot of very senior HR folks on this call who I'm sure would like to hear your answer to the question as well. So what are the best ways that HR can work with finance? And for, what are you caring about? How do they better speak to your side of the house?
Yeah, so I very similar experience to Ann, in that we have a great relationship with our HR team, and I'll answer it more from the positive side of the coin, in terms of, like, one of the things that they do a very good job of with us is explaining the need of the position, what it's going to do, what impact it's going to have on the business, and what are the benefits if we hire this person, what are the benefits of that role going to be. So, I've been at other organizations where it's like, we're gonna hire 5 people, no idea why we're gonna do it. We're just gonna do it because it's 5% higher than last year, and that's why we're gonna do it. This year, it's much more of a conversation about like, what are the benefits to the organization if we hire these people on HR? The HR team has a very good understanding of what that is and why we're doing what we're doing with our organization and with our headcount planning. So that's one of the things I appreciate a lot. I'd say the other thing from a finance standpoint is like one of the worst things in FP&A is to be surprised. And just having that open communication and collaboration so that you're not surprised by 10 people showing up in September, one day, it is very important. And so that's not something I've experienced, but being surprised is never good. And so that's one of the ways that I appreciate working with the HR team here for sure.
Well, I want to thank our panelists very, very much, Tushar, Nick, and Anne, for being here, for sharing your experiences, and for being so frank in your discussion. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to kick it back to Steve from day one to close this out.
Sure, thanks, Emily, and Anne, and Nick, and Tushar. I love the concrete examples and all the takeaways you offered from your hands-on experiences, along with all the forward thinking about what this can provide to companies. Thanks again to TeamOhana for their support and all of you who participated today. So on behalf of all my colleagues at From Day One, thanks for participating and stay well. Bye for now.